The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
There is beauty and there is brokenness. And I don't think you can really have one without the other in our world. You can ignore one for the other. And I think if we close our eyes to the brokenness, we do ourselves a disservice. We're not really recognizing the truth of the world. But if we only look at the brokenness and we don't accept the beauty that's there as well, then it's not good for our hearts. And so it's opening our eyes to see that there is both.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. I first got to know Rachel Donahue when she took one of my online writing classes. She's been a pillar of the community in the Habit membership ever since it started. So it made me very happy when she published a collection of her poems with Bandersnatch Books. It's called Beyond Chittering Cottage. Jen Rose Yokel said, the poems in Beyond Chittering Cottage spin the smallest observations into celebrations and hum with the joy of being alive. Rachel Donahue, I'm so glad you are with me today on the Habit Podcast.
Thank you. It is an honor to be here.
So your new collection of poems, new-ish,
Yes.
is Beyond Chittering Cottage.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very much a collection that is informed by place, by your place in North Carolina.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes. Yeah. We had lived a very nomadic life for the first dozen years of our marriage. We were overseas workers. We were living in Spain. And when we were stateside, we were usually traveling, visiting churches, raising support. And so when we came off the field in 2015, we had not been, I think, in any home longer than 2 years. And that was in Spain, in an apartment in Malaga, in the middle of the city. And so when we settled here, it was very different because we came back close to Mick's family. They had been on the same property. Huh?
Mick is your husband.
Yes, Mick is my husband. We moved back close to his family and the family greenhouse business. Mm-hmm. And his family had been here. Mick's family has lived on the same street his entire life. Every neighbor on that street has been there Mick's entire life. And he has an uncle and an aunt and cousins who live nearby. And so I think he was the first one in the family, including grandparents all the way down to grandchildren, the first one to move more than like 100 miles away from home. And that was when he came to college. Yeah. And so, and then we moved very far away to Spain. So when we came back, we were coming back to people who were very deeply rooted in place. Yeah. And so that was something new for us in our marriage. And so, he went back to work in the family greenhouse business, and I was at home with our 3 children. And that was an adjustment period because we had always been working together in everything we were doing in ministry, in creative projects. It was always collaboration with the 2 of us. And so he was suddenly working outside the home, gone long hours. And I was here with the children and didn't really have many relationships and didn't really have a purpose outside of what I was doing here. So, it was a hard transition time for sure.
And that's when you wrote these poems in that transition time?
I wrote the poems after that transition. So, the beginning of 2017, we had been back about a year and a half at that point. We had just moved into our house here. We had been living in Mick's grandparents' farmhouse, which is right across our backyard. And so the house that we live in is in a neighborhood, and they had built this neighborhood behind the family property. And so we had the opportunity, an amazing opportunity, to build a house right here, close to family land. And it was the first week of 2017. Our daughter was a few months old. And I had been struggling with, what is my purpose? I mean, my first purpose is as a wife and a mother, and that's always been priority for me. But I couldn't get rid of this restlessness that just had been lingering for a couple of years. And so I spent the first week of 2017 in a social media fast, really seeking what God had for me and the children in this new season. When Mick was working, he was gone all the time. I didn't really know what God had for us. And it was during that week that God brought me back to literature and poetry. And just very quickly after that is when the poetry came for me to begin writing. And once it came, it was like a flood that was suddenly unstopped. And I think within 48 hours of the first poem I wrote, I had half a dozen poems.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it was life-giving. Just after having this restlessness and really seeking what God had, just being in that place of submission, looking for what he had for me, it was a gift. It really was just a life-giving change.
So I want to talk about the difference between, you've used the word restlessness twice. I was expecting you to be using words more like rootedness, right? Because these poems are coming out of you, getting a little more connected to the place where you are, being a little more rooted. What's the relationship between restlessness and rootedness in the process by which these came to be? Yeah,
I've always been content wherever I am. And that Mick and I have talked about this a lot, because when we lived in Spain, I was very content there, very content. And even with all of our transitions, I was able to just kind of put down roots and enjoy being in the place where we were, no matter how transitory it was. And felt very keenly that this world is not our home. I mean, that lifestyle kind of lends itself to not feeling like this is where we are meant to be long term. But whenever I came into writing, the writing satisfied that restlessness. And with the writing came opportunity to observe the place around me. And it was in that close observation of where I am and paying attention to what's around me that I found the deeper rootedness of the place that we're in right now. Yeah.
Yeah. In your introduction to this collection, you talk about, you mentioned stewardship, right? That in this piece of property where y'all live, that's been in the family for a long time. How many generations? I mean, there were great grandparents.
So I found out recently that the property behind the neighborhood over behind us goes back 5 generations in Mick's family. So his grandparents, but then I think his grandmother had built a house right behind her parents. And I think maybe her grandparents had lived there as well. It was, or maybe our children are the 5th generation. I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot more history here than I expected there to be initially. And it's even for my husband, like Mick grew up rabbit hunting in the fields where there now stands a neighborhood. And so that was the fact that his memory goes farther back than what is here now really lends something to how I see this place.
Yeah. Well, I was starting to ask the question of stewardship. You said that this property has been in the family for several generations, and has, you've talked about stewarding that piece of property.
Right.
What's in your mind? What's the connection between stewardship and writing?
Right. I think so. We are very conscious. Mick and I both have been conscious of the fact that everything that we own ultimately belongs to God. It is not ours. It is entrusted into our care for the time that we're here. And we feel like that we are stewards of what he's given us, that we're merely managing these things, not just monetary resources, but our time and our energy, the property that we live on, the opportunities that Mick has as the owner of a business. We feel like we are going to give an account for these things one day. And so we feel like we have to keep good stewardship of these. And I feel like writing is just an extension of that. As a woman who has had the opportunity to be educated in a world where I mean, even especially with the news lately of everything that's happening in Afghanistan, it makes me even more grateful for the opportunities I've been given. And I feel like that's something to be stewarded as well. And being given the words and the inspiration to write, it has come as a gift. But on the flip side of that, I also feel like it's something I need to be responsible with. And so I put forth the effort to really work on my craft because I feel like I need to be faithful with this part of my life as well.
Yeah. You, I'm sure I know this topic has come up before on this podcast, and we've talked about some of the habit membership, I know, but the idea of having a mindset of, rather being territorial in the way you think about your work instead of hierarchical, instead of trying to figure out where, how do I rank compared to other writers or other poets or whatever. Really thinking in terms of, I've got a patch of ground that's been entrusted to me. And as I steward and tend and nurture that patch of ground, that's how I know if I'm, pursuing my calling, doing my work. There's no other scorecard, really, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That reminds me of a conversation that I had with a friend. They were doing missions work in Central Asia while Mick and I were in southern Spain. And we reconnected they're in the Nashville area. Her husband is pastoring, and she is working with girls who have been rescued from human trafficking. And she's doing a really powerful work. And that's an opportunity that I would love to be a part of something like that. And I don't have the ability to be engaged in the ministry that she's doing in the way that she's doing it. But as we were talking over lunch one day, and I was telling her about my writing and the story that I was working on and things like that, she said, I don't even think like that. I can't even comprehend how somebody can think of something other than what it is, like in metaphor and symbols. She said, that's just a completely foreign concept to her. And it just kind of brought it home that God has given me this thing, and I can be faithful in stewarding this thing the same way that she has been faithful in stewarding the thing that she's been given to do. Yeah. And God has gifted her and equipped her to do that ministry. And he's gifted me and equipped me to do this thing. And it's an opportunity. And I'm really thankful for it.
Yeah, that's great. By the way, Chittering Cottage, is that one of the buildings on the property is called Chittering Cottage?
That is the name that I gave to our home when we built it. Got it. I had always thought about naming places where we lived, but most of the places where we lived didn't really lend themselves to being named. When you're in an apartment in the middle of the city,
its name is Apartment 6B.
That's exactly right. And so, but then, we were building this house, and it was one of those early desires that I wanted to give it a good name, because I knew this was going to be a place that we were going to be for some time. I wasn't sure how long. We've already been here longer than we expected to be initially. But the name Chittering Cottage actually came from the two noises that I heard most frequently while they were building our house. And it's the chittering of our children and the chittering of the birds outside in the woods behind our house. So, yeah, that's it.
You're like Anne of Green Gables, giving names to places, and she always feels
Maybe
like she's got to. But as she says, if I see a thing and it doesn't have the name I think it ought to have, I just rename it. Basically,
that's right. It needs a good name.
Yeah, that's right. Well, okay. What a brilliant transition to what I was wanting to talk about next. And that's birds. There's birds all in your collection of poems.
Yeah,
and they do. Now, I'm sorry. Now I'm interrupting you. I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
But these birds aren't all that sweet in your poems. I mean, I'm sure there are some sweet ones, but I think the first bird poem is you call Music, and it starts out. We're thinking this is going to be a nice poem about bird song. It's called Music. There's birds. You step out and you hear the birds singing, and next thing I know, there's this aerial battle going on between the little birds and the crows.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you end with these lines that I love. These cries and calls, they are a groaning, but when I close my eyes, I still hear music.
Mm-hmm.
And since I've got you, tell me about that. You have zeroed in on the unmusical part of bird communication, the squawking and the fighting. What do you say you still hear music?
Well, one of the things that I have started doing since we moved into this house is birding. And I still feel like I'm a complete amateur. I don't know bird calls just by sound. I know a few. I'm learning more, but I am completely distracted. If I see a bird outside the window, you can forget whatever I'm working on. I'm just going to watch. And so there was one morning that I had seen the birds unusually active. And so I just stepped out on the patio. I left whatever I was doing at the time and just walked outside just to watch and listen. And, our children always talk about, the squirrels are playing tag and, when they're chasing each other around the trees and who knows what they're actually doing. Yeah. But so there was kind of this fanciful idea at first that this one bird is chasing another one. And it did seem playful, but I stood and I watched just to see what was happening. Why are all these birds so active? And that's when I noticed that the crows were coming in and, they would be happy to steal whatever they can find. And these little birds are trying to protect their nests. And so it's not it really sort of is this aerial battle that the little ones are chasing the bigger ones and they're trying to scare them away. And eventually they leave, but then they come back. Like I just stayed and I watched. What is happening here? And it really, that's where the groaning came from. Like, I can't ignore the fact that this is part of the brokenness of our world, but I still hear birdsong. There's music in that birdsong and there's beauty there as well. And so it's both and that there is beauty and there is brokenness, and I don't think you can really have one without the other in our world. You can ignore one for the other. Yeah. And I think if we close our eyes to the brokenness, we do ourselves a disservice. We're not really recognizing the truth of the world. But if we only look at the brokenness and we don't accept the beauty that's there as well, then it's not good for our hearts. And so it's opening our eyes to see that there is both.
Yeah. That's great. I did notice that pattern, the pattern of, in this collection, this pattern of you looking at things until they sort of give up some secrets.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think I take that from, the model of Solomon in the Proverbs when he says that he passed by this field and he saw that the wall was fallen down and like it's overgrown. And he said, I saw it, I learned what's the verse? He says, then I saw and considered it. I looked and received instruction. And that's when he's talking about a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. and poverty creeps in like a robber and want like an armed man. And so he just looked at this field and learned something because he looked long enough. He saw it, but then he looked, and it was in studying it that he was able to glean wisdom from it. And so if that's true about our world, then if I pay close enough attention, there's going to be something deeper there than what I see. And so when something catches my eye, I try to stop and really watch and look and pay attention. And I don't always come away with these little nuggets, but when I do, that usually finds its way into poetry.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see. There were. I was talking about your birds aren't always sweet. You've also got a buzzard kind of stalking a man who's on a lawnmower. Or I don't know if the other man's on the lawnmower. It's a man mowing grass. Maybe he's walking.
Yes, he's pushing a lawnmower, and there was a vulture just a few paces behind him, walking, following him. When I saw it, I thought, I can't believe I'm seeing this. Like this can't be real, but it was. I thought
it's so funny. It seems like I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but it seems like a lot of writers are interested in birding. You said birding. I was going to say bird watching, but yeah, I think you're supposed to say birding. I wonder if you got any thoughts on that? I mean, why are writers birders?
I don't know. I can say for myself, I am just fascinated by birds. And I think part of it is the fact that they are amazing creatures to watch, and there's such variety. I think I've counted at least 20 different varieties of birds that have come through our backyard at some point over the past few years. And the fact that they are here and nobody is overseeing, like, to try to keep the bird population, like the birds are just here, that they are part of God's creation, and they go through their life cycles, and they migrate, or they roost and habitate these spaces, and they have so much character, and they're just fascinating to watch. Yeah. There's so much variety, and it just feels like a form of abundance. Yeah. And so it's like we've been trying to get them closer. We've hung hummingbird feeders and been fascinated to watch them. We hung a couple other bird feeders and a suet feeder. And this very morning, the birds came. And so we all stopped what we were doing in the middle of school just to watch the birds, because they finally got close. Yeah. So it's just been, I don't know, I think it brings joy.
It's amazing that we ever get used to the idea that these creatures can just flap their wings and soar up into the air. You know,
right?
The fact that how do we ever come to take that for granted?
I don't know. And we do, like, we see birds flying overhead, and we do just take it for granted. But when I really stop and look and pay attention, I'm just amazed, and I can't not be.
Yeah. Well, you're giving an account here of that's a very good reason to write. You know, the fact that most people are really everybody about most things sort of goes on autopilot and stops noticing the miracles that are around us. And I love the fact that a poet, you know, looks around and says, wait, this is not just business as usual. Did you see that creature there just flapped its wings and went up into the air? Pay attention to this, you know?
Yeah. They're amazing.
Yeah. Well, moving on from birds to outer space. I love your poem, Death on Mars. And, which again, I don't have it in front of me because I am in the wrong place, but this is the one where, I guess it starts with a child saying, "Did you know there's no?" Well, actually, do you have it in front of you?
I can find it. Yes. It
starts with a child observing that there's no decomposition on Mars, and then you kind of play that out.
My oldest son had read it. Yes, bodies cannot decompose on Mars. My son told me it's a problem, and it is a problem because the experts, NASA's working on these expedition, and they're thinking through all the problems. And you usually think of the problems of living on Mars as sustainable air supply and food sources, but the fact that bodies can't decompose is a problem. Yeah. And so, the more I thought about that, I'm like, I don't want to live in an environment where where bodies can't decompose. Like there is something so meaningful. And, I think that poem ends with, give me air and water and dirt and spring, because without the decomposition of what is dead, you cannot have spring. And those things they're so intricately connected that, I don't know. Don't sign me up for the Mars expedition.
But I just loved the observation that as you, if we don't have decomposition, then no new life can spring. And I just love the way you put. I don't relish the idea of decomposition. Right, that's not something.
Right, right. It's not the first thing you think of with poetry.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so again, I love that change of perspective that you offer there. So thanks for doing that. I loved it.
Thank you.
But I think my favorite poem in the collection is Ash Wednesday.
Yeah. Ash Wednesday. It really was not written on Ash Wednesday. It was written on an average Wednesday where I was sweeping up the ashes that had fallen on the patio. We had a fire pit that was out there, but the bottom had rusted out of it. So all the ashes had fallen down on the patio and it was a big mess. And so I had gone out one day to sweep it, and my daughter followed me out the door. And so she was out there playing while I'm sweeping up, and the wind caught the ash and blew it back onto us. And so, our patio is in this corner where there's not a lot of air movement, but the wind caught it and it just created this cloud of ash that kind of sat over us for a minute. And so I held my breath and I'm like looking at my daughter, like hoping that she's not breathing this. And then by the time, and I think she was aware of it and was just trying not to breathe it in as well. And then when it passed, like we both just started laughing. And it was just this, I don't know, I couldn't help but think about the lines ashes to ashes, dust to dust. And then the ring around the rosy that also kind of falls through those lines. That's ashes, ashes, we all fall down. And those things were so closely connected in my mind. I had to write it down.
Yeah. You've got, it's kind of hard to describe without seeing it, but if you read the main, what I thought of as the main lines, it's this cheerful little story of a mother and a daughter sweeping up the ashes and getting ashes blown on them. And then you enter, in the interstices of those lines, you've got these lines from the Book of Common Prayer and that this is all it's your buzzard chasing, following it's this memento mori, the death stalking these happy little moments.
Yes. The memento mori pops up a lot in what I'm writing. And I don't know why. I mean, it might be that, so when our oldest son was born, I nearly died. They had to deliver him 6 weeks early, because my body was shutting down. I had, the HELP syndrome, the preeclampsia and the HELP syndrome. My liver and kidneys were failing. My platelets were bottoming out. And even after the C-section, I was hemorrhaging, and they had to rush in and give me blood transfusions and in a central line in my neck. And as he was testing it, he said, if this doesn't work, she's gone. It was down to the wire. I went into DIC, which is, in layman's terms, they call it death is coming, where you're clotting in places you shouldn't, and then your body is producing this chemical that makes your blood thin too much. And so you either die of a clot in the wrong place, or you die of bleeding out. And so it's this cycle that most people don't survive. And so I went through that. I was 25. And so I think that perspective has really reframed the last 14 years for me. And that may be why this theme comes up so often, because for 14 years, I've been conscious of the fact that these years are a gift. Like I should not have survived that experience at any other point in history. And at most other places in the world, I would not have survived that experience.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm very, I think that's always kind of in the back of my mind.
And also at the moment of new life coming into the world, right? It's this combination of new life and at least the possibility of death. Well, no wonder you're writing these poems that you're writing. That makes a lot of sense. I didn't know that story.
I had never thought about that before, but I think that probably has a lot to do with why I think about death so much, but also see those things intertwined with beauty, because the life that I've been given is a gift. The life that we've all been given is a gift. But I think it's easy to take it for granted. And if I hadn't almost lost it at such an early age, I probably would take it more for granted than I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, you're paying attention to the fact that birds can fly, right? That right. Most of us don't pay much attention to most of the time. That's right. Great. Okay. One more poem I wanted to talk about that also feels very, as a good, birds are the one recurring theme, but also there's the poem called Inheritance, in which I guess you're digging up like things that you've literally dug up from the yard.
Yes. So
from ancestors.
The woods behind our house were the woods that were also behind the farmhouse that Mick's grandparents lived in, and so. Back when they were the ones farming this land, they didn't have a place where they could easily dispose of, like the trash wasn't coming to the curb to pick up whatever they were ready to throw out. Yeah. And so a number of things that couldn't be composted or reused were tossed into the woods. And so we started uncovering those things as we were clearing out the underbrush, and a rain would come and kind of wash things down. And so these things would surface. And it was the first few things, it was like, oh, wow, this is odd. It was the clothesline with the big concrete still on the pole. Right. And they're just laying in so we're having to clear some of that out because it's a hazard for our children. And then so there was an artificial Christmas tree that we dug up for months because, the bulk of it we found, but then every time it would rain, you'd see another piece of it. And, and so I started keeping a mental list because they were just such unusual things. And eventually I started writing it down because I didn't want to forget. And at some point I realized this list of things tells a story about the people who lived here, because I knew Mick's grandparents. They took me in as one of their grandchildren. And the fact that I was seeing things that they had used and I knew the kind of life that they had lived, it just made me want to tell that story in some form. So I tried it as a list poem, and the most of the poem is just a list. There aren't too many verbs. Right. Yeah. Just a list of the things they used. Yeah. I think, I love lists in yes. I mean, they're so useful, right? I mean, a list in writing it starts to feel like the world, all these nouns. Right. And I think the fact that you like lists probably helped me pay attention to the list of things. I mean, I had noted, these are interesting objects, but I think I was paying attention specifically to that list because of your affinity for lists and talking about that in some of our writing classes. Yeah. And, I was just talking about this in something I was doing last night, the fact that even a short list feels more comprehensive than just a general, like I've got Anna Green Gables on my mind right now, but there's this moment where she lists about 4 things, brooks and gardens and woods and fields and the whole world. And just that one little list feels longer. I mean, it feels more comprehensive than that comprehensive phrase, the whole world. Yes. And but because it's concrete and specific. And again, that's what poems are for, right? They're not for giving us big generalities like the whole world. They're for giving us a list of the clothesline pole with the concrete on it and the iron and now I can't remember what you found out in the woods, but the list is a story. And we think of lists as just being uninteresting,
and yet.
Yeah, there's something very powerful about the concrete. And I think that's one of the things that I've been striving for in my poetry is taking abstract ideas and seeing concrete ways that those are fleshed out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the more concrete I can get, the more effective it is. Like my more abstract poems, I don't like them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I'm tempted to say the abstract poems, that's not what poems are for. Now, and then somebody can just show me some brilliant abstract poems, and so I'll have to take it all back.
I'm sure somebody somewhere can write a very effective abstract poem, but I think I'm most drawn to the ones that in some concrete way show me something that I then understand this abstract idea more fully because of this concrete image.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. Okay. You know what the last question is in these conversations, so you're about to get it. Well, who are the writers who make you want to write, Rachel?
Most of them are poets.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The first writer who made me want to write was Lanier Ivester. And back in 2017, in that week when I was really searching what God had for us, I read a poem that she wrote. It was actually in the first volume of The Molehill, and it was called "I Came by a Lane." And there was something about the way she described this tension of living or being from two different places or being present, and they both feel like home, and that it was the most natural thing in all the world. But she's describing the nature of the place and the flowers that she's passing. And it just resonated so deeply with me because, we had just transitioned back, and I felt so much at home in Spain and so much at home here that poem just really hit me emotionally. And I read it and I kind of sat with it, and then I read it again 3 or 4 times. And I think later that day was when I wrote my first poem in this kind of new season of poetry. I think prior to that day, I had written exactly 2 spontaneous poems over my whole life. Everything else was an assignment for school or something.
Yeah.
But then that unstopped this fountain of poetry. And so she was the first one. But then since then, A.A. Milne, his stories and his poems always make me want to pick up my pen. Lucy Shaw, I want to be like her when I grow up.
No kidding.
I mean, every time I read something of her, it gives me something to aspire to. And it makes me want to write, not thinking that I can do what she does, but it makes me want to be better, if that makes sense. Like she makes me want to try harder and really work on the craft.
Here's a quick thing. I just recorded an episode with her and Ned Mustard.
Did you really?
Last week. I don't know if it'll be released before or after this episode is released, but
that's what I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah.
She's
great.
Just amazing. She's so inspiring.
Yeah.
Kate DiCamillo.
Oh yeah.
Her stories are just so, like, they make me care about things that I wouldn't care, like a porcelain rabbit. Like, what? I don't care about a porcelain rabbit. And then I start reading her story, and oh my goodness, it's powerful.
Yeah, that's great.
And so she definitely makes me want to write.
I love that. The people who make you care about stuff that you hadn't occurred to you to care about before. That's such a gift, Yep.
Such
a gift to the reader.
It really is. I mean, I'm sure there are more. There are a lot of poets that Malcolm Guite also. When I hear him read something that he's written, I don't think I can ever attain to that. Like, there's just such a beauty about what he's written, but he's another one that just makes me really love wordplay and love the sound, and just makes me really want to work at my craft to hone it just a little more and sharpen it. Maybe one day I can, reach toward something of that.
Yeah, that's great. I love what he does. Every time I read something new from him, and there's so much new from him all the time.
Right? I don't know. It's amazing. I can't keep up.
Cranks it out like that. Yeah, it really is amazing. And I know you have relationships, friendships with other writers, and I always love hearing from writers who who want to write because of their friendships with other writers. I know you're mixed up with Bandersnatch books and
yes, with our Bandersnatch group. That definitely, one of the poems that's in this collection, I first read at one of our Bandersnatch meetings, and it's the one that begins, "They slowly climb the hills of dust beneath penumbral shadows and mark not where the jagged peaks lie hidden in the fallows." And when I read those lines, Carrie, who was sitting socially distanced across from me in my garage, said, "I love this. It reminds me of this poet and this poet." And she just really connected with it. And it was so encouraging. And it made me want to go write something else. Let's do more of this.
Yeah, right. That's great. All right, Rachel Donahue, thank you for being here. I loved talking about your poems. And I just really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit more and getting to know your poems, getting to know you through your poems. And
thank you so much.
Here. So thanks. And I hope I know I'll see you soon.
Oh yeah, I'll be around.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.